Welcome to Online Literature, a class designed by Mariana Gonzalez. Today, we will be talking about an incredible woman called Nadine Gordimer, a Nobel Prize winner from South Africa, and we will focus on one of her many stories, The Ultimate Safari, an important piece of work that talks about war and a family that tries to escape from it. Here we'll try to understand what inspired Nadine to write this story, and how the political and racial divide of her time had stuck with her. Nadine Gordimer talked about racial conflict in each one of her writings, showing her position against the apartheid. She was a white woman fighting for the indigenous people of South Africa, which was pretty rare and incredible because of how much she was risking, as it was prohibited at the time. The apartheid was a law that segregated South Africa's population. It was imposed by a white minority descended from Europeans that wanted to keep their privilege above the indigenous people. I want you to imagine being in this situation. The year is 1948 and many laws are approved to oppress you. Voting rights are taken away for all colored people. Interracial sex is prohibited, as well as interracial marriages. Every citizen was classified by their color. The best lands and real estate were reserved by white citizens, and non-white people were pushed to places called Batustans, making these places poor and insulated villages. Public services and places were segregated too. Beaches, buses, schools, and even park benches. These laws were widely unpopular, but either way they waited until the 60s to start a series of protests against them. But something else started to happen. A group of black and mixed-race South Africans started oppressing their own people. Renamo, as they were commonly known, didn't just enlist men and women, but also young children. They terrorized villages and supported the apartheid laws, when it benefited them, of course. You can now realize that these so-called bandits inspired Nadine to write this story, but either way, the war and the civil disobedience had already started. In this story, we are taking into the eyes of a young girl, telling us her experience in the war. By the time the story ends, she's just 11 years old. She doesn't tell us much about her, but through her eyes, we can see the long journey she takes with her family. There isn't much detail about the parts of the country she goes through in the story, but we get a deeper look into her emotions in each place she visits, starting in the village. Here she has many contrasting feelings, the first being abandonment. The story starts like this. Listen carefully now.
That night, Mother went to the market and she never came back. What happened? I don't know. Father went away and never came back too, but he was fighting in the war.
I'd like you to take into heart what you just heard. How would you feel in her position, losing your loved ones in the middle of childhood while a war is happening? She never tells us that her parents are dead, but nevertheless, we could figure it out. Luckily, she and her siblings weren't alone. They had their grandparents with them, taking care of them, raising them. But there wasn't just abandonment during the war, but hunger and scarcity were even more prevalent. The last straw came with the bandits, individuals that inspire hatred and fear in the villages. Is this last thing what inspired them to leave their home? Our little girl felt so happy when she heard the news. She wanted to leave the place where her mother never came back and she was always hungry. She wanted to go to a place with food and no bandits. It made them happy to think that a place like that could exist, far away. Then the story takes us to our second location, the Kruger National Park. This is a real place located in South Africa's northeast, and it is one of the biggest hunting reserves in Africa, with many wild animals. It is also a tourist location with multiple safaris. Our little narrator tells us.
We had heard of the Kruger Park. Many men in our village went there to hunt and work. It is the place where white people come to stay and see the animals.
We have to realize that at this point, the only option to get to a safe place was to go through this dangerous park. But the family wasn't alone. A group of people were with them, and a guide was leading them. They had to be careful. There were camps of white people they had to evade. Nadine Gordimer does a great job capturing the reader with each page, underlining the racial conflict in the story. They had to protect themselves from both, the wild animals and the white people, not knowing which one was more dangerous. With each day passing, it was harder and harder to find food. This created despair and malnutrition among the group. The girl expresses her worry this way.
My little brother is losing weight, but he feels heavier in my arms. My older brother stopped talking, and it's very hard to wake him up. Just like Grandpa, like if he couldn't hear us.
Imagine that level of fatigue and starvation. Imagine if you were part of this group and this story. The most discouraging thing was her grandmother's condition, as she tells us.
I could see how the flies walked over Grandmother's face, and she didn't move a muscle to scare them. I was worried, and I took a palm leaf to make them go away.
Our narrator didn't want to lose anybody else. She tries to cheer up her family, but one day the exhaustion increased as the grandmother's feet started to bleed. And even though she was strong, she couldn't carry more weight. So they left her belongings in that place, and they continued with the essentials. At this point, you could see the detachment of everything but survival. The grandfather couldn't continue, and they had to go on without him. There was no evidence of his death, but we can imagine it happened pretty quickly after that. Already weak and watching death nearby, she tells us.
I rested in my back, and I saw those ugly birds with beaks like hooks that flew and flew around us. The tears fell into my hands as they washed down from my eyes and nose, but Grandma didn't seem to notice.
Don't worry, it doesn't end here. It's just the high point of the story. Now give me the opportunity to tell you about the third and most important chapter. In the refugee camp, our writer Nadine Gordimer shows us hope for the first time. When the grandmother and the children get to this place, we can enjoy her happiness and wonder as she tells us this.
There's a huge tent, bigger than a church or school, standing tall in the ground.
It is important to remark that the children had to stop going to school when the war started. So this place was embedded with hope as it reminded them about school and about the church. They were given a taste of peace after so long. In the tent, they helped them with the malnutrition they were suffering. She explains us how. A beautiful nurse with pretty hair and high heels gave her a special powder. She told them to mix it with water and to drink it slowly. At this point, it is shown that white people can be kind too, as there was no mistrust between either party. In this place you can work and study. The grandmother insisted that the children had to go to school and explained them the importance of studying. As the story is concluding, the girl's hope to come back to the old village is shown, and she says,
I will go back. I will be back going through the Kruger Park after the war ends and the bandits go away. Maybe Mother is waiting for us. Perhaps Grandfather, after we abandoned him, just lagged behind and some way he found a way through the Kruger Park.
In the story of the ultimate safari, the voice of a young narrator and protagonist describes us the reality of what she went through. With a simple, honest, and direct dialect filled with innocence and poetry, we find an unstoppable storytelling in a prose that displays images and literary resources like the simile, humanization, and the irony. Before ending this video, I'm going to let you with a small quote. My name is Abraham Garcia, and remember that you can watch this class in Spanish and many others on this channel.